Welcome back to the Table Rush Talk Show. I'm your host, Mischa Zvegintzov, and in today's episode, we dive deep into the heart of transformative leadership. I'm thrilled to share a conversation with Jack Shitama, a thought leader who brings a refreshing perspective on leading with calm and clarity. Drawing from a rich blend of spiritual wisdom and family systems theory, Jack unveils the power of the non-anxious presence in leadership. Join us as we explore how understanding our own anxieties can unlock a more collaborative and effective leadership style. Welcome, Jack, to the podcast.
Thanks, Mischa. It's great to be here.
Hey, fantastic. So I just thought we'd get right into it. The non-anxious leader. I myself love this concept, love this idea, but what is your thesis with the non-anxious leader? Or perhaps a better way to say it is, what's the central idea or key message you're conveying when you talk about being a non-anxious leader?
So the central idea is that people don't like to be told what to do, right? And nowadays, everybody's a volunteer. Even if you pay them, that doesn't mean you're going to get their best effort, right? So a non-anxious leader is somebody who can inspire other people to follow by being a non-anxious presence. And a non-anxious presence is somebody who knows what they believe, who knows where they think things should go in their organization, who's able to communicate that in healthy ways and stay emotionally present, especially with those who are most resistant and most anxious about the change. And what I think is important to distinguish here is that a non-anxious leader says, here's where I'm going, here's where I think we need to go. You're invited to follow, but it's your choice. And by giving people the choice to follow, you actually make it more likely they're going to want to. Because if you tell them, you got to come along, and they're anxious or they're resistant or they're uncertain, they're actually more likely to push back. So that's kind of the basic concept.
Well, that's very interesting. Let me ask you a question. How did you fall into this, or how did you come into this idea? I mean, obviously there was some pain points in there that.
Yeah, 30 years of pain points, I'd say. I'm an ordained United Methodist minister. I started seminary back in 1991, and at the same time started pastoring a small church. And in my first semester, I encountered a book called Generation to Generation: Family Process in Church and Synagogue by Edwin Friedman. Edwin Friedman was a rabbi, and he took Murray Bowen's family systems theory and applied it to congregational leadership. And I realized very quickly that this was something that was really important for me to understand. And it became life-changing, so much that, I've kind of dedicated my life to it. And the idea here is that every relationship system has a kind of set of norms and the way they do things, whether it's your family or a corporation or a community or a nation, although sometimes nations not so much. Those norms create what's called surrounding togetherness pressure, that you have pressure to conform to the norms. So when somebody says, I don't want to go to college, I want to get a job. And the parents say, what? Everybody in our family goes to college, right? Well, okay, that's a norm, right? That's this togetherness pressure. And what family systems theory tells us about leadership is when you start responding in unhealthy ways to resistance and anxiety in your workplace or in your organization, that's actually coming from the way you function in your own family of origin. So when somebody gives you bad news and you yell at them, there's a root cause in some relationship in your own family. In other words, you learn that behavior. And what we teach is that as you start to go back and unpack all that, you learn what makes you tick without blaming others or blaming yourself. And when you do that, you can start to actually function differently. When somebody gives you bad news, you say, oh, tell me more. Or, okay, what are we going to do about that now? And that's that non-anxious presence, right? That's that being that non-anxious leader. So I got into it through my work in seminary and have applied it mainly in churches and nonprofit organizations. I do have some coaching clients who are in the for-profit world as well, but it's mainly about actually understanding what makes you tick and how your own anxiety makes situations worse, not better, so that you can then start to function as a non-anxious presence.
Mm, I like that. I kind of thought that it drifted so quickly. Did you find yourself when you started pastoring, if I'm saying that right? Were you having a hard time leading, or were you getting frustrated with your flock or the people who were coming to your church, and so there was a pain point? Or did you right out of the gate think, oh, this is the way I need to lead? Does that question make
Yeah,
sense?
I think right out of the gate, it was something that I started putting into practice, sometimes more subconsciously than consciously. And I started to realize over time that actually this is why we've been able to lead change in churches when other churches seem to be stuck. And so so it, I don't want to say it came naturally, but I think I was able to apply it pretty quickly. And I think that helped me quite a bit because churches are like any organization. People are comfortable with the way things are. And so when you are leading, and in my definition, leading involves change, because if you're not leading, you're just managing, right? If you want to keep things the same, you're just managing. And so to me, leadership involves change, and that change results in discomfort. Some people are able to deal with it, but a lot of people aren't.
Absolutely. Some words that came to mind, or some thoughts that came to mind, I was just typing down. This sounds, words you could use would be, this is more collaborative. Like, this is a lot more collaborative.
Mhm.
You're not taking things personally as well. So being able to detach from, if someone's not following you or liking you, or what other words can I say? Or you're getting that pressure, they're not, what did you say? Adhering to the norm.
Mhm.
You can detach from how that reflects on you and be more collaborative, while at the same time we're taking accountability for our own actions as a leader.
Right. Right. The way Edwin Friedman puts it is, a non-anxious presence knows where they end and another begins. In other words, I'm going to take responsibility for me, and you take responsibility for you. If you're upset, I'm not going to try to soothe you and comfort you. I'll tell you I care, but it's really your responsibility to deal with it. And so the interesting thing about this is, the reason it's helped me to not take it personally is, when if somebody's yelling at me or something about something, or if they're being really toxic, family systems theory tells me that's more about what's going on inside of them. It has less to do with me, because there are people who are, they'll come and say, I'm uncomfortable with that change. I'm a little scared. I'm a little concerned. Okay, that's healthy, right? Somebody who says that they're dealing with their own stuff. But somebody who's lashing out at you, it's really a sign. It's a warning sign that something's going on inside of them. And I'm not going to be able to fix them, but what I don't want to do is I don't want to withdraw from them. So what family systems theory tells us is, when you're dealing with anxious people, toxic people, people who are giving you a hard time, actually you want to move a little bit closer and stay connected to them without arguing with them. Because if you withdraw, if you pull away, they're actually going to get worse. And this is what's counterintuitive about it, because they're the last people we want to stay connected to. We want, when somebody's giving you a hard time, you want to avoid them. But actually, when you avoid them, it actually makes things worse.
Could you put that into real life example?
Yeah. So let's say you're trying to lead change in an organization, and it doesn't really matter what the change is. One of the things that we say in family systems theory is, it's process, not content. So it's about the emotional process that's going on, not the content of the situation. So you're trying to lead change in an organization. Maybe you want to launch a new product, or maybe you want to buy another division from somebody else, or whatever. It changes change. That's the emotional process. Okay. And one of your senior staff comes to you, and they lay into you. They say, I cannot believe you were being so stupid. You're gonna our stock price is going to go to zero. You're going to take us down, right? And okay, what's the emotional process going on? The emotional process is they're blaming me, they're defining me, they're being very reactive and emotional. Okay, that's a sign that this is not about me or where we're going. It's about them. Because somebody who's healthy can come up and say, I have concerns about this, and let me share them with you. Because if we do this, I'm worried that da 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 da. Okay, that's healthy, right? And as a leader, you want to listen to that. But if somebody is blaming you and you try to defend yourself, you're going to get stuck in what's called a conflict of wills. I don't know if you've ever tried to convince somebody that you're right and they're wrong, and when they're really emotional about it, you get stuck, right? So this idea of being self-differentiated is that you're able to stay non-anxious with them. You're able to tell them, okay, I hear what you're saying, but this is where we're going to go, and you're free to not go if you don't want to. It, Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. I was just thinking of a last relationship I had where the pull away thing, I get it. You pull away and that can be triggering to somebody, and perhaps they're feeling not heard, or you're abandoning them, or all these sorts of things, or maybe they feel like it's a slap in the face, right? Straight up, you're not even acknowledging me. But I I think I had a habit. I'm just thinking of this last relationship because this describes it so well, with this woman that I dated for a while. And I got the feeling that when I would try not to pull away, I don't know, she felt like I was placating her. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
just, yeah, maybe you could speak to that for a second. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're doing it just because you are, you're trying to be a good partner or whatever, yeah, that that may feel like being placated, as opposed to saying, I care about you, but I'm going to go do this today because this is important to me, right? So the idea that there's a concept called self-differentiation. I mentioned that, and that is knowing your own goals and values in the midst of surrounding togetherness pressure and being able to express that in healthy ways. So you're getting this surrounding togetherness pressure from your partner to stay close, right? And you're doing it kind of out of a sense of obligation, and they're sensing that, right. So but if you can say, I care about you, but I need some space to myself today. I'm gonna go do this. You're still staying connected, but you're also expressing yourself in a healthy way. And I like to, Stephen Covey used the term integrity in the moment of choice. And it's in that moment of choice when we often slip, when we just don't get it right. And so, well, are you staying with me today? And well, oh yeah, sure. Right. You just kind of, but integrity in the moment of choice means, the way Covey described it, was increasing the gap between stimulus and response. And so, are you staying with me today? Okay, I'm going to pause. What's really important to me? Okay, well, I care about this person, but I also want to do this. And so then you actually respond in a way that is consistent with your goals and values while staying connected, even when there's pressure to conform. And so that's a great example because it's a personal example. But then if you were to kind of look even deeper, you'd say, okay, now who in my family of origin, family of origin is the nuclear family you grew up in, and then aunts and uncles, grandparents, cousins. Who in my family of origin am I like that with? So give you an example. I'm the youngest of three. My mom is a very sharp woman. She's 100. She's still alive. She was one of the first systems engineers in the IBM organization back in the late 60s, and just really a great woman. Strong-willed, but she never gave me a hard time. But I always gave in to her. I always did what she said, or I hid it. Like when I would do things I wasn't supposed to be doing, I would not tell her. So what I found over in my young adult years was that I was a conflict avoider. I was kind of a pleaser, and that, so in the situation like that, I might just say yes. I might not say I want to do something else today. But then when I felt the call to go into pastoral ministry, I wasn't raised in the church. She wasn't a Christian, and so I knew it was going to be this thing where I'm going to have to tell her that I'm being called to do this, and she's not going to get it, and so but I did. I felt calm. I had a peace about it, and she spent about a month like sending me little notes. Do you really believe in the resurrection? Or calling me. Do you know you're never going to make any money? And all this kind of stuff, everything in the book, and of course that that would have been process. That would have been content, not process. If I get into arguing with her about it, then we get stuck. And I would just say, Mom, I feel a peace about this. And after about a month, she called me and said, if you really feel this is the right thing, Dad and I will support you. We're behind you. And after that point, I started to get better at actually standing up to people. Now, Murray Bowen, who's the founder of family systems theory, says, yeah, even the most extraordinary person is only going to get it right about half the time. So half the time we argue, we give in, we say the wrong thing. So we're always working to get better at it. But to the extent we can increase that gap between when the thing occurs and when we respond, we have a better chance of acting in line with what we really want to do, what we believe.
I love that. It's power in the pause is how I've heard people
Absolutely
say that, or a little framework that I use. Acknowledge the tension, or that there's that tense moment, or an agitated or doubtful, perhaps. Acknowledge, pause, pray, listen, right? Listen, you spoke to that, and then embody or execute, or what am I being told, and stay true to that, and put that out there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. What was I going to say there? I had all these great thoughts. It's funny. God, I just had this great thought because you got me thinking when you were talking about your mother. Oh, this is what it was. You're obviously outgoing. You're a pastor, or you have the capacity to get on stage, to speak to people, to put yourself out there, to bring this energy. And I think, where did I write my note here? You said conflict avoider. And then I think it's so interesting I'm obviously outgoing. I have the capacity to speak on podcasts, or speak on stages, or strike up a conversation and get you on a podcast. I think that's almost the polar opposite of that's on the other side of the coin, where we avoid conflict, which doesn't make sense. Right? Am I making sense when I'm saying that? Like, we can be so outgoing and risk taking, but then we're like, no, conflict. You know what I'm saying there? Yeah.
Except one is, the engaging with people, speaking, doing podcasts. It is putting yourself out there. There's a certain vulnerability in that. But emotionally, there's not as much at stake. So, I mean, yeah, maybe people don't like what you say or whatever, but when especially it's somebody you care about, the stakes feel so much higher. And so the way I like to phrase it is, the higher the perceived emotional stakes, the harder it is to be a non-anxious presence. So one of the things I'll say to people is, so tell me who the people in your family are or in your work, that when you see a text message or a voicemail from them, your anxiety level goes up. Because those are the people where you have perceived high emotional stakes, and it's going to be harder for you to be the self that you want to be with them. And so I think it's a both and. I think, yeah, we can get out there and we can do these things, but sometimes when the rubber hits the road with people we really care about, we're not very good at it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's it's so interesting. I was just thinking about my ex-wife. I've got an ex-wife. We've been married 10 years. This is great. This is therapy for me, Jack. Thank you so much. I've talked about my last relationship and not my ex-wife, but I have two boys, 20 and 22, Cooper and Waylon, as we record this, and Don and I are great friends. The boy's mom, Don, if you're having to listen to this, sorry we're using you as a case study. But it just came to me of how she's the trigger for me like that, like your mother was to you. I can still have a hard time laying down those hard boundaries. And actually, you're reminding me of a thought I had. She was such a great teacher for me to start learning how to have those hard conversations with love, is like how I like to say it. But you said something interesting. We've got churches on the decline and we've got churches on the rise. Yes, you spoke to that a little bit, and then you said this family systems theory that you apply or started applying 30 years ago when you became a pastor and growing your church. Yeah, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
So we've got kind of old and new, perhaps, or maybe you could speak to the different tracks that we're seeing there, and then how do you help churches make that change? Or does that question make sense?
Yeah. So there's really two elements going on, and the probably the bigger element between churches that are growing and churches that are on the decline is age. So not just age of the people in it, which is one thing, but also age of the building, age of the congregation itself. So churches that have been started within the last 10 to 20 years tend to be flourishing. They have a more up-to-date feel to them, both in terms of their ethos and their feeling, and often in their buildings, often with their music, all those types of things, and so they tend to connect and feel more relevant to people today, because most people today haven't grown up in church, right?
Yeah.
Churches that have been around a long time not only have older facilities, but they also have people who've been in that church for a long time. And it is hard to change a culture like that. Now, I've seen it happen, but in general, that tends to mean that church, it's not going to grow exponentially. It's not going to have explosive growth, but it's going to be stable and be involved in important ministry in the community, like helping house the homeless or helping to feed the hungry and those types of things. And they'll grow a little bit too, but it's the actual system itself, the people in the congregation who've been around 30, 40, 50 years, they're set in their ways, right? They say the 7 last words of the church are, we've always done it that way before. And so there's this built-in bias against change. So when you have somebody who can function as a non-anxious leader in that setting, you can actually get them to do interesting things. There's a church in the Washington, D.C. area, and their pastor went out and just started connecting with people in the community, especially the people that were hanging out by the church, the homeless. And long story short, they ended up building affordable housing on church property for the homeless. It wasn't about necessarily growing the congregation, but it was about growing an impact and influence. And so I think what you'll see is that churches that have been around a long time, that have a non-anxious leader, they'll increase their impact, even if they don't increase their numbers significantly. Churches that are newer tend to have a dynamic leader, and they'll grow early on. However, if the leader is not a non-anxious presence, a non-anxious leader, they're probably going to end up getting stuck at some point, because that leader is not able to lead in a way that allows people to be themselves and flourish. And so I don't want to say it's like a cult, but it can tend to be in that. And that doesn't mean all of them are like that. It just means that would be the downside on for newer churches. So it's a long answer to a short question, but
I love it. That's a great answer. all these questions are coming to me and I can't write them down fast enough, and I knew what'll come up. So I'm going to pause for a second, which you're teaching us to do. Oh, gosh, so many good questions. I'll see if that other question comes back to me. But you said something interesting earlier where you perhaps didn't grow up in the church. Your mom and dad perhaps weren't uh, churchgoers or I don't want to say spiritually minded because that's not you didn't grow up in the church, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Spirit is, there's a difference between being spiritual and being religious, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, they weren't religious.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so your parents aren't religious. What happens there? Is there a tension point in your life that drives you to the church or at that young age?
For me, and yeah, I was 29 at the time. For me, I was, I was wondering what's important in life. I had been an entrepreneur. My brother and I had started a solar business back in the 1980s, early 1980s, in Florida. Did really well for several years, but then the tax credits that supported alternative energy expired, and they weren't renewed in the end of 1986. We probably lost 2 decades of development because of that short-sightedness. But anyway, we had to close the business. I ended up with some personal debt because of it. And I managed a printed circuit board plant for a while, and then I got into insurance sales. And I'm just thinking, okay, what really matters in life? We had 2 daughters, and I met some people that really seemed to be grounded spiritually, and they were Christians, and I started actually reading the Bible. And what I found was, oh, this Jesus that I read in the Bible is not like the Jesus that I kind of get when I see people in church. I had attended church before with friends. The Jesus I read about was, he was loving people unconditionally. He was accepting people without judgment. He was spending his time with the people who are condemned in society, and back at that time, that would have been somebody with AIDS, right? But when I was in the mid to late 80s, somebody with AIDS was the equivalent of a leper in Jesus' day. And so I was, this was all really hitting me pretty hard in terms of, yeah, that's the kind of person I want to follow. That's the kind of way I want to approach the world. And that's, long story short, that's how I ended up becoming a Christian and then becoming a pastor.
And so what year was this again? And how old are you?
I'm 63 now.
Okay.
That was 1987. Yeah, 1987. And yeah, I mean, I was actually a pastor by the time I was by 1991. So 4 years later, it didn't take very long.
That's cool. And were you called to be a pastor? I would consider myself super spiritual, but not very knowledgeable about religion, although parallel to you, except later in my life, I'm digging more into, some of the more religious, philosophies, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if I'm saying that right, but
Yeah. I mean, the way we understand it is the way I understand it. It's you experience a personal call to a particular type of vocation, and I believe everybody has a call. Okay, everybody has a call to a particular vocation, and in this case, for me, it was to be in pastoral ministry, and I was attending a United Methodist Church at the time, so there was a process to explore that call, to be mentored, and then to get ordained. And so, some of that stuff is institutional. But just about everything has an institutional aspect. And the question is, can you live within the institution and still live out who you are authentically and make a difference? And I think as long as you can do that, you can live a full and meaningful life, right?
amazing. Yeah, I'm currently reading or just finished, and I'm going to read it again. I love it. It's Emmett Fox, the Sermon on the Mount. Have you?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started reading that. Someone gave it to me a bit ago. I finally pulled it off the shelf fairly recently. I don't know, within the last 6 months. And I love just reading a page or so a day. I think it's so powerful. But this will tell you where I am in my journey with knowing the Bible or knowing religion or these sorts of things, right? So I'm starting to read about, Jesus and then Moses, and I'm reading some other stuff too. And I always thought my whole life that like Jesus and Moses were technically hanging out together, like bros, right? Like friends. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
And then,
Right.
yeah. And so I'm reading along and all of a sudden there's something in there that like, oh, wait a minute, there's like 2 or 3,000 years difference
That's
between.
right.
Yeah, and I was like, wait a minute, what is going on? So I start digging deeper and deeper, and so I'm really just learning all this fun stuff about I don't know, biblical history. Maybe if
Hmm.
I'm saying that right,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Well, I mean, Christianity owes its existence to Judaism.
yeah,
And one of the things that was stunning to me is that Abraham was the father of both Isaac, but also Ishmael, and Ishmael is considered the father of Islam. And so you have three great religions that all come from Abraham, which is that's, I think, is pretty cool. I'm one who kind of takes religion a bit with a grain of salt, because it's sometimes it's hard to tell when humans are involved and when it's really God. Um,
yeah,
but there's a lot of people in the world who trace their religious identity back to Abraham, whatever that means. I just
yeah,
think it's pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's super cool. Yeah, I'm learning so much and really having fun with it, and I think it's so interesting. Just not to give too much info or well, I got sober when I was very young, 17 years old, and
Mhm.
I managed to stay sober one day at a time, straight line. And part of the 12-step modalities
Mhm.
are start to nurture a belief in a higher power of some sort,
Mhm.
crack that door open and reduce your ego and take accountability, which you spoke to. I love that. Or, we chatted about that for a second, taking
Mhm.
out accountability, which is part of this family systems theory.
Mhm.
Yes, you're taking
Yep,
accountability
that's
for,
right.
yeah, for your youth, how you grow up, how you react to people, how our parents influenced us for good or bad, or the way I look at it is we can blame a lot of things on our parents. And at some point it's like, I'm a 55-year-old man. I have to take accountability.
Right, right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, family
Yeah.
systems theory is all about taking responsibility for yourself, and allowing others to do the same. And I think 12 step is very much about that, right? It's all about being accountable and for your actions, forgiving people, asking for forgiveness, all those things that help you to grow up and get more mature, right?
Right. I know. Unbelievable. How to be an adult, really.
Yes, yeah.
Hopefully. And then the service aspect of it. I love that about, the 12-step modalities are
Hmm.
laced in service and ego reduction and
Right.
leaning into that higher power or God or call it what you will. So as I've progressed over the years, it's super fun to be open-minded to where perhaps 15 years ago, if we'd have had a conversation about Jesus or the Bible or this or that, there would have been contempt erupting out of me,
Hmm.
even though I would have been trying to keep an open mind, where now I can have a lot of fun with it. I
Yeah.
appreciate you letting me go on this tangent. Um,
Sure, sure. Some of that, I think, I think wisdom does and maturity does come with age and life experience. I think the older we get, we realize the more we don't know. Whereas the younger we are, we think we know it all.
oh my gosh, right? And we have less to prove.
Yes.
Right? It's like, gosh, what if I have nothing to prove? Right. And as we get older, there is less to prove, I think, if you're healthily, emotionally mature,
Hmm.
growing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So did you find when you started your you fall into the church. It sounds like you had an existential crisis in your young 30s. You'd had some financial success, perhaps grown a business, this and that, maybe explored church a little bit in your youth, but then just had an existential crisis and kind of pushed you into the church. Like, well, money's not the answer, or success isn't the answer. That kind of a
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I was chasing after the gold ring, and all of a sudden it's like, maybe that wasn't all it was cracked up to be, right? And
yes.
when you think about like the people who do really amazing work in the for-profit world, the ones who really excel don't do it for the money, right? They're doing it to make a difference, to try to make some impact. If you whether and whether you're talking about Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, and you can disagree with their personalities, but for the most part, the money is a byproduct. Warren Buffett's another great example, right? I mean, he just stayed focused on what he wanted to do. And it just so happened that he became one of the richest men in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they are powerful examples for sure of following a calling,
Right.
and clearly called to serve in a certain way. And of course, we can get pulled off course a little bit. We're human, so it's bound to happen. But I definitely get the sense oftentimes with Elon, and absolutely with who's the Apple guy? What's his name?
Jobs, Steve Jobs. Yeah.
Yeah. Or what's the new guy's name?
Tim Cook. Tim Cook. Yeah.
Yeah. That Tim Cook could care less about the status of the whole thing, or I'm a billionaire or not. And I get that impression with Elon Musk too. But sometimes I think he goes, wait a minute, I've got $200 billion.
Yeah.
I'm going to flex my muscle a little bit, maybe, or something. But yeah, and the illusion that brings us happiness anyway. So I think what's so powerful about following that internal clock, or God's calling, or say what you will, I'm constantly praying, how can I be of service? What can I bring to the table? How can I be of service? What can I bring to the table? And really, money doesn't matter. It's like, in the moment, I'm happy, all is good. Sometimes I seem to have more than enough. Sometimes I worry about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We've never been rich, but we've always felt cared, like, we've had what we needed. We raised 4 kids. We both chose to work jobs where we could have flexible schedules, and that meant we made less money, but it also meant we got to attend virtually every sports event, every teacher conference, anything that was going on, we were able to be there because we had decided that that was more important than having the kind of job where we couldn't do that, and even if it paid more money. So.
Yeah, so powerful. I retired at one point, and it was very hard to retire. When I went through that divorce, it was clear that the universe, or God, was like, hey, you gotta be available for those kids, get them through school, get them to swimming practice, get them to make their lunches, read in their classes, do those things. And I was like, but I'm a business guy. Right? And nope, it was like, nope, you get to go. I did a bunch of these, such great exercises. I did all this internal work. Sounds like something all along the lines of family systems theory. There's a guy, Kyle Cease, out there who has a great program, but I came to one of those jumping off points, which I've had many in my life, to get sober. And then it was like, you need to quit your job. And I'll never forget it. I went to the boss and was like, I quit. I'm done with mortgages. I was a mortgage loan officer. I'd been doing it for 20 years. And he said, well, match whatever offer is out there. I said, no, I'm done. I'm retiring.
Can't match this one.
Yeah, I can't match this one. Exactly. Got to get my kids through school. And he straight up looked at me. I'll never forget it. And he said, I wish I could quit too.
Yep. Yeah, you never regret that time because your kids are only there for a certain amount of time. And one of the things I've found, because I'm not a grandparent, is I feel like parents these days, my kids are millennials, they have better priorities than we did. They, in general, I mean, even though I think we had good priorities, I think they really do value time over money, in ways that I think is, it's great. It's great to see.
I would agree 100%. It's a much more grounded sort of motivation, or however it's grounded. I would agree with you completely. Yeah, we came out of the fuel of the Wall Street 80s. What was that movie? Wall Street.
Yeah, Wall Street.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But did you find that when you started your ministry and you started preaching, did you have growth quick, or or success quick, or?
Um, I mean, reasonably, the first church I started in was a part-time church. It was just a small church that, so I could go to school and pastor. And we had about 60 people in there on a Sunday morning when I started. And we grew to somewhere around 90 or 100 in 3 or 4 years, enough so that they could actually pay me a full-time salary when I graduated seminary. So I was happy with that. Then in our denomination, you get reassigned from time to time. And I got assigned to another place with smaller churches. We had two churches. One had, I think, one had about 60 on a Sunday, and the other had about 40. And that one grew to 90 or 100, and the 40 grew to like 75. So, I mean, numbers aren't everything, but it was an indication that something was going right. And I think more importantly, you could see, especially in the second setting, because we had a little more critical mass, you could see us starting to make a difference in the community. So as people were growing spiritually, they were doing things like being involved with feeding the hungry and providing money for people whose electricity was going to get shut off, or doing small groups for people who are grieving or going through divorce, and so doing health ministry to help people who don't have access to health care. And just to me, that's the whole point. If you're going to grow, the whole point is so that you have the resources to make a difference. And so yeah, I mean, that in 2000 I was actually assigned to run our area's camp and retreat ministry. So I've been actually running a camp and conference center for the last 23 years, although a year ago my successor took over, and I've been focused just on leadership development. So yeah, it's in the camp and retreat world. It was great. It was like running a business, but it was a nonprofit, right? And so we would raise scholarship funds. And see, what I found in the business world was sometimes you had to make decisions based on money and not people. So you might have to lay people off. You might have to, cut people's salary, that kind of thing. I didn't like that. And then in the church world, I felt like congregations really weren't as results oriented as they should be. Oh, we're all volunteers. Oh, we're following God. And so the camp retreat world for me was the perfect balance. It was running a business. Our budget last year was $2 million. So it's not a large business, but it's not a small business. And but we could make decisions based on mission. And so all the time, we have parents say, I don't have money to send our child to camp. That's okay. You send them. And you can make those decisions because of your focus on your mission and impact. And as a faith-based person, we believe God will provide us the funds to take care of that. We'll be okay. And so yeah, I feel blessed that I've been able to work in a place that kind of mixed the passion I have for the business world and for leadership and all those things with actually making a difference mission wise.
That's amazing. What a gift.
Yeah.
How powerful to be able to work from that place, or give or serve from that place. That's awesome and inspiring. And I love the way you've framed that. And it really hit me and sunk in, the power of service, and how churches serve, how you're serving, how you're bringing together people, and churches are bringing together people to make a positive difference in the world. So awesome. Thank you for helping me internalize that a little bit more. I love that.
Sure, sure.
So somewhere along the line, someone goes, "Hey, you're great at leading a church or growing a church or having positive impact, and we're not. So you can help us, right? Because now you've got your non-anxious leader where you're you're grooming or coaching up churches. Am I saying that right, or how does
Yeah,
that come about?"
I do work with churches, but I work more with individual leaders.
Oh,
So over time, we started doing training for leaders, mostly church leaders. But what I found was that the family systems theory is not something that's easily understandable. It's very counterintuitive, and so like you can't just hand them Edwin Friedman's book and say this is just read this, and if you try to teach it to them, I found that when I was teaching it to him, I was doing a pretty good job of making it easier to understand. And so that's when I wrote my first book. That was started writing in 2016, and the book was released in 2018. And then I've written several books since then. And so my focus really is on taking this theory and trying to make it understandable for people who, whether they're leading their family, they're leading a church, they're leading an organization or a for-profit organization. And so, yeah, that's what the Non-Anxious Leader podcast is about. And I'm just trying to help people lead in healthy ways.
I love it. And I forgot to at the beginning. I'm usually very good about this, so I apologize. As anybody listening right now and or watching, go to the nonanxiousleader.com and you can see all about Jack, and you can click on books and see his books. And I referenced one already, Anxious Church, Anxious People. Here's another one new habit, one big goal. You don't need more willpower. What you need is a system to help you focus your willpower to develop a positive habit. Once it's a habit, it becomes automatic. Use this repeatable process to improve your spiritual, physical, and professional life. Love that. You've got one. If you met my family, you'd understand. And then I won't read the description, but the last one, everyone loves a non-anxious presence. Calm down, grow up, and live your best life. Amazing. These books, again, are all available at the nonanxiousleader.com/books. So your favorite thing to do then is to coach leaders in the for-profit space, yeah?
Really in the nonprofit space, but I
Okay.
I will, yeah. I mean, I will. I have some for-profit, but it's more in the nonprofit space, mission-based organizations, whether it's a church or some type of nonprofit. Some of them are religious, and sometimes it could be secular. So, yeah, it's I enjoy helping people to first, the term we use in family systems theory is do your own work, which is also kind of sounds like 12-step, right? You do your own work in your family of origin, unpack all that, learn how to function differently in healthy ways in your family. And that actually translates to your leadership in other organizations in healthy ways and great ways. I've seen it make a difference for leaders where the difference is night and day in terms of how they respond to anxious people and how they inspire other people to follow them.
So good. I have some more questions. Do you have a hard cap on time? I am okay to run over a little bit.
I can go over it just a little. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So favorite success stories that you could reference? You spoke to that, or transformation before and after of people who embraced your ideas here.
Yeah, I have one coaching client who is an executive in a small startup, and came to me when things were really anxious, both in their family of origin and their company, and really embraced family systems theory. So did the work, and the work starts with the family first, and started talking to parents, and siblings and learning more about themselves, going to grandparents and aunts and uncles, learning more about themselves. And the transformation was amazing. First of all, they really learned to deal with their anxious colleagues and to respond in healthy ways, not to either just give in or get in a kind of get in a conflict. And what they found was that these colleagues actually started to gravitate towards them. I said that's my newest book is Everyone Loves a Non-Anxious Presence. There's something about somebody who knows who's really so comfortable in their own skin that they can be themselves and let you be yourself, right? And so it was really amazing to see that happen. But even more importantly, as they started to do their family of origin work and talk to these family members, they started to gravitate toward them too. Like I would almost describe it as like they became the center of the family. The cousins would call and say, "Hey, what's going on?" And aunts and uncles, and it was just like because it's such a healthy way of functioning. People, they want to be around that. They want to connect to that, and they feel comfortable with being more vulnerable with you in that respect. And so I think that's one of my favorite, because I just this person, they did the work and you could see the transformation both personally and professionally. It's amazing stuff.
That is awesome. So it's almost like it became the glue for the family, or yeah,
Absolutely.
and then helped pull them forward. And the idea of leading by example too, right? They made
Yes.
the change, and then everyone else was like, "Hey, this is pretty cool. I want to change too."
Yeah, and what happens in systems, whether it's a family or an organization, is when the leader starts to differentiate in that way, self-differentiate, become a non-anxious presence, those who are kind of in the middle actually get more mature. They respond to it because they say, "Oh, they start actually functioning in healthier ways." Those who are the least mature actually rebel. And that's the challenge for the non-anxious leader, is to then be able to remain a non-anxious presence with those who are the least mature and who are causing the most trouble.
Yeah, and I'm thinking ultimately you've got to be willing to give them the space to leave and then
Yep.
come back.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, come back on their own terms, perhaps. Yeah. That's cool. And then on the work side of things, I imagine you can go from a fractured business teetering on the brink to now we're cohesive moving forward towards a vision.
Right.
Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Quick. I'm thinking, what are the main reasons someone goes, yeah, I'm not buying this, or I like the idea of this non-anxious leader thing, but I've got a business. What are people gonna think when they see me perhaps softening, or is that the perception, or softening, or placating, or being weak, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just because you are emotionally connected to people doesn't mean you have to be weak, right?
I know that.
The best leaders are caring but firm, right? And in fact, I'll teach courses and people will ask, well, does this mean that you always just let other people do what they want, right? Just because you know what you want, you let other people do what they want? And I'm like, no, you need to decide what matters to you. And so the example I'll usually give in that situation is a case of abuse, right? Let's say somebody's abusing you, whether it's emotionally, physically, whatever. You don't to be self-differentiated doesn't mean you let them get away with that, right? In fact, it means that you think long and hard about what really matters to you, and then you say something like, I really care for you, but I'm no longer willing to accept this. And if it continues, we're not going to be together anymore, right? That's what a non-anxious presence does. Not blaming the other, okay? But you decide how this is going to end. Or are you going to continue this behavior because we're going to end, or are you going to change? And unfortunately, I think in a lot of abusive situations, the abuser doesn't change. And so, but this is more of an example of how a non-anxious presence sets a boundary based on what they believe. So it's not being soft. It's just being connected and caring while being yourself.
Love it. Great answer. Thank you for that. The next thought comes to mind is someone goes, okay, I can embrace this idea of, like you just said, having boundaries, being firm in my resolve, but being loving, communicating at a deeper level, things like that. So I'm not being weak, I'm being more effective. And actually, it's empowering everybody, really. But I've got all these habits internally, like I've got too much baggage from my past, or I don't have the capacity for change. That more of an internal conflict for the person. Yeah, does that question make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you won't have the capacity of change if you don't believe you can. Not with that attitude. So what I like to say is that the family systems approach helps you to understand what makes you tick without blaming others and without blaming yourself. Because you start to understand that in these relationship systems, whether it's a family or an organization, it's the systemic forces like togetherness pressure that actually have formed us and are really make us who we are. And that's not to blame the system. It's not to blame others. It's just to understand, okay, now I understand why I react so strongly to that tone of voice, or now I know why I respond so strongly to that phrase, or whatever those things are in your family of origin that have helped form who you are. You start to identify them, and the tool that we use is called a genogram. It's like a family tree. But then you also start to look at the relationship patterns. Okay, where were people way too close, where they couldn't function as individuals, or where were people so distant they were cut off? They had a feud or a relationship, a relationship cut off where they didn't have contact with each other. Where was the addiction? Where was the infidelity? Or where were the family secrets? All of these different things. And as you start to look at them as a system, you start to better understand, now I get why I react in these ways. Now I get why I respond in these ways. And then the next step is to start to change how you respond because you better understand. And that the power in the pause thing, right? You remind yourself, okay, this is not what's going on now. This is what has been programmed into me, and I'm going to do it differently, right?
Yeah, love it. Amazing. Thank you for that answer. Oopsie, Google just signed me out of my Google sheet that had my questions on it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So while I'm logging back in, you do me a favor and tell everybody where they can find you. I know you've got a leadership resources newsletter that they can subscribe to.
Yeah, if you go to the nonanxiousleader.com, and there's no hyphen in there, so no punctuation, the nonanxiousleader.com, you can sign up for my 2 for Tuesday newsletter. It comes out every Tuesday, of course. And I usually have some kind of short form content. Right now, I'm running a little video series called Level Up. And so they're 2 to 3 minute videos. And then 2 recommendations for articles that I have found helpful to me as a non-anxious leader. And they focus around family systems theory. They focus around leadership in general, also around productivity. I'm kind of a productivity geek. And they also on self-care. So I kind of take a holistic approach that, it's not any one thing. You want to kind of let yourself be exposed to all these things, and then find the things that work for you. I don't think it's a one size fit all, and so you want to just kind of sample things and then try the things that work for you. So 2 for Tuesday newsletter, you can sign up there, and You'll get it at 4 a.m. Eastern every Tuesday morning.
Awesome. Excuse me. Awesome. This has been a ton of fun, Jack. Your non-anxious life clearly is serving you well. For anybody who is not seeing this, but just hearing this, Jack is 63, looks amazing, has amazing energy, and just the way you talk and talk about what you do and your passion for what you do is awesome and inspiring. So thank you so much. Quick, I would ask, is there anything before we stop here? Inevitably, when we end a conversation, you go, oh, I wished I'd have said, or oh, I should have said, or I meant to say, or I wanted to say. Is there anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, I think about the sign off on my own podcast, which is go be yourself. Just go be yourself.
Love it. So good, Jack. Thank you for jumping on the show. I'm going to hit stop and we'll say goodbye offline.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's belove.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.